I would never have predicted this, but here we are. It's another DF Direct, but this time covering Ubisoft? Really? We're doing Ubisoft. Yeah, and I'm not here alone. I've got Alex Battaglia with me.
Yeah, here once again coming at you in profile because it's much easier to watch some footage while we're talking and doing this. And yeah, I'm surprised that we're talking about Ubisoft stuff too here, because usually we do the big, like the AAA conferences from like Microsoft and Sony, and just really that because there's already so many games packed in there. But we really wanted to talk about this today because we were surprised at the quality here. It was that good, actually.
Yeah.
So we definitely
there were some bangers shown, and this is the conference that perhaps reminded me most of classic E3.
Mm-hmm.
They had a stage presence. They had some very cheesy people up on stage, which I enjoyed.
I saw that.
You know what? The things that we used to laugh at, I kind of miss them, and Ubisoft brought it in spades, but they also brought some very impressive technology, especially from Ubisoft Massive.
Yes.
And their Snowdrop engine, which is exactly what we're going to talk about first. The first of two games that they showed, which is, of course, Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. So this is a game that has been in development for some years now. They've shown it before. We knew about this, but this is the first time that I finally felt like they showcased the vision of what they want to accomplish with the game itself.
Mm-hmm.
And this game is Far Cry. Okay, maybe no. Okay, that's a little bit.
Oh, John,
come
on, you're bang on. You know it.
So clearly, this is essentially an Avatar take on Far Cry. You've got bases to conquer. You've got an open world to explore. The difference here, though, is that it's a fantasy world not rooted in reality, and as a result, there is some very impressive verticality. Some very cool looking first person parkour style gameplay, lots of stuff that sort of separates it from that. So it's like taking elements from Far Cry perhaps and creating its own thing out of it. But from our perspective, the DF perspective, I think it's the technology that kind of brought us here today, because this is a Snowdrop engine game.
Yeah.
The Snowdrop being basically Massive's internal engine that has begun to receive usage in other games as well, including the Mario and Rabbids games, no less.
Mm-hmm.
But this one is a real showpiece. We knew that it was going to be. We'd seen things on this before, but yeah, they actually showcased the game running on PlayStation 5 as well, which is unusual to directly capture a console version. And after analyzing the footage closely, I think we can say that yes, I believe that it absolutely was captured on PS5.
It totally looks it in a good way, though. Like, there's nothing that I would say too overly negative about that. It's like, it has like the right compromises in the right places. The thing that we did notice when counting through the trailer and going through it, both John and I did separate resolution counts here just because we were really interested to see how they got this running. And we did notice it looked like a 4K output with a 1440p internal resolution when we did count, but there's some like artifacting in there and some like really blown out pixels that made us thought like, because sometimes it looks lower than 1440p internal.
Absolutely.
And I think that's because of FSR2 shenanigans, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But basically, it makes sense that what we're seeing here is running on a console, and it looks really good for it. I think the things that I took away from this, from Avatar, beyond, you know, some of the like larger scale stuff, is it's one of the first games we've seen this generation, along with some of the stuff I think we saw, like Fable in the Microsoft conference, where I really can say I can't imagine this running on a last generation console at all.
Yeah, I tend to agree.
And it's mainly due to the world complexity and the draw distances. But another thing that is really important to point out is the first time they showed off this game, I think it was a couple of years ago now, maybe it was a year or two ago, when they showed off that one trailer. They also did a handful of interviews after the fact, and there was some talking about it, and they mentioned how they were going to do a specific lighting for the current gen versions of this game, because it's only current gen, and they were saying they were working on ray traced lighting. They said they had a software ray tracer and a hardware accelerated ray tracer. And based on this footage here, I mean, it's a little bit hard to tell in some scenes because it's like cutting all the time and etc. But there are two scenes that I thought really showed off really well that it potentially could be using something like RTGI, actually, which is really good looking.
Especially those sections where they're sort of walking between areas that are occluded by this like cloth fabric, like this colored drapery hanging on top of the scene, right? And you can see sort of colors bouncing around. It's very vibrant looking.
It's great looking.
You know, and so that's a great example of that. just like you said, it's this scale of the world that really sticks out, and the fact that the detail at a distance is still holds up surprisingly well.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, to capture these movies, I'm not a big fan of these movies at all. In fact, I stopped the second movie after watching it for about 3 minutes. It was so awful. But one thing you can't fault them for is their visuals. And this looks like a direct capture of those visuals in terms of design. Especially, like, I actually really love you've got that organic Na'vi stuff, but then, like, they go to, like, the hardcore PMC military stuff, and it reminds me a ton of Crisis 3. And when you think about the fact that like Massive's like studios are actually partially formed by Crytek veterans, at least after Crytek went under, I can definitely see some of the DNA here visually from those things, especially like when they're like, I don't know, they look like some sort of oil tanker that they arrive on later in the scene. I have no idea what it was.
Some sort of refinery equipment.
Something like that. But it's just like, it just reminded me of like those bases in Crisis 3 that you take over in like the later missions. And then, that's another area too, where I think you can get a sense of that. There appears to be some sort of really nice indirect lighting solution here. Where like you look under the underside of the pipes, there's like darkness there. There's not like that weird glowing that you associate from like raster lighting models everywhere.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's really good looking. I think there's some other things to point out here. There was the usage of SSR in the trailer, but I think they did mention in one of the interviews that they did previously that they do have ray traced reflections as well as maybe ray traced shadows or something like that. It was a little bit hard to understand what they were saying in that initial interview, but so maybe those are things that we'll still be seeing at some later point in regards to a PC
perhaps
version.
I mean, exactly. I think that the likelihood of having PC specific features seems high here.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see that, and Massive is definitely the type of studio you might expect to see that from. But even as a console game, I think what they've shown here is really phenomenal.
Oh, it's great
overall. And man, I'm just looking at more of this footage here.
Yeah, it's awesome.
It's really beautiful stuff.
Yeah, I'm also like, I'm my fair critic here, I would say, of the Far Cry games. After I played the third one, I know you recently played 6 and you actually did quite enjoy it, right?
I had a good time with it.
But like, as long as it avoids this game as long as the game avoids some of the Far Cry tropes, like I don't want to climb a tower. And I don't want to. They did mention crafting, which got me a little worried. But
I will say towers and such they were pared back in 6 somewhat.
Good. Okay.
And I would also say, the crafting stuff was all right, I guess. It's because at least in Far Cry, you would pick up materials, animals, things like that, and they would feed directly into the gameplay loop where like you see an instant improvement to a thing that you're using often, right?
Yeah.
And I think if you're going to do crafting, having a direct impact on the core gameplay is the way to do it.
Yeah.
So there is that, but also, here it definitely looks like there's more variety in the scenes. Like they showed aerial combat where you're flying on one of those winged creatures and taking out enemy aircraft in the sky. There's these oil refinery looking bases that you're tackling. There's the forest, there's the verticality, there's all this stuff going on. And one of the things I'm wondering about is how after that base infiltration segment, they mentioned something about nature taking over once again. It returns to its natural state, and they show what looks like that oil refinery now completely covered in like vines and grass, and it looks abandoned. And I'm wondering if they actually have implemented some sort of mechanic in here where, as you play over time, these places that you've conquered are taken over by nature and change. And if they do that, that would be an interesting both a mechanic, but also like a visual feature to layer on. Maybe they have different layers so that they can kind of like pull back or push forward depending on what you're trying to show, to sort of allow the environment to change as you play, which would be unique.
It'd also be interesting because an issue with the Far Cry games is that when you take over a base in an area, there's almost no reason to return there. You know what I mean? And here, if there's maybe some sort of different gameplay unlocked in the area after it's been reclaimed by nature. I don't know if it's like some sort of treasure hunting or something like that, but that would be really cool, actually. Or maybe the wildlife returns that used to be there and you can get them for, I don't know, some sort of resources you need. I
think the only complaint I would raise about the visuals, though, and this is something you also noted, was the way motion blur is implemented.
Yeah, it's the first.
So
It's the first massive game we've seen with motion blur, I think, actually.
right, because the Division did not feature that for some reason, and they have implemented per pixel motion blur here. But the difference is that when, like, say a hand moves in front of your face, in like a CG film or most game engines now, the entire image of the hand will blur. Like if you do a freeze frame, you'll see sort of a blurring on the edges of the geometry, like because it's like a lens effect, right? A shutter speed kind of effect. But here you actually see the sharp silhouette of the object still outlined with the blur happening on its interior surfaces only. And I've seen this sort of like per pixel motion blur effect before, and I think it's usually a cheaper solution, I would imagine, but I'm kind of confused as to why they're using it here. I guess. Like it seems unusual given everything else they're doing that seems so cutting edge.
Yeah, I know, like, because all the other post-processing it just makes the game look framier than it needs to be. That's the issue, because usually with like a longer, like when there's more blur occurring across the screen, you don't see as much of the 30 FPS like we see here. And this looked a little bit framier to me than usual 30 FPS with motion blur. Like, but the other post-processing was really, really good, I thought. Like, I like it when your character crouches down or slides and or prepares their weapon. There's like some near camera depth of field there. It looks super good. Like that's the thing that I'm a huge sucker for in games like this. Another thing that I actually really liked that did call back to Far Cry, but also called back to Crysis for me, because I am getting some Crysis and Far Cry vibes here. For obvious reasons, is that at around 3:47 in the gameplay overview trailer, the your main character shoots like some sort of explosive at one of the mechs, and one of the trees actually starts losing its branches.
I saw that.
And I'm curious if there is actually some of that sick, Crysis or Far Cry 2 level destruction here in terms of those things.
Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah.
And also the explosions as well, by the way, look really good. Like huge plumes of smoke and everything is lit beautifully.
The fire too.
It's awesome looking. The fire, that's a really neat effect.
Yeah.
I guess the only concern is just shortly after that part, you see your character rip open one of those circuit boxes and pull the wires, and just that animation, like it immediately gives me flashbacks to like every Far Cry game ever, like, except for the first one.
It's like the Far Cry, like, yeah, you do that, and I think
they love doing that.
They love doing that. I mean, there's a lot to be really praising here. I think because one thing is we saw last gen with Massive's last Snowdrop titles, there was a downgrade. How do you say it? Uproar after they initially showed the Division, because they had to pare back some aspects of it maybe to a degree for that initial release, but they showed it off a lot earlier. And here we're seeing the game pretty close to release and already running on console. And then there's already obvious sacrifices there that you can see that point towards it running on console. So I actually don't think this will be downgraded in any sense of the word. In fact, I only imagine it'll be upgraded, like all the things that John and I were talking about, like, oh, the motion blur looks a bit janky. Maybe that'll be fixed.
Yeah. Stuff like that. So, but yeah, I think first impressions on that really, really positive.
Super
and I actually
positive.
wonder, like, from our perspective, you can see the rendering flaws for sure. But if you just showed clips of this interspersed with clips from the film, at least the first film, I wonder if people would actually recognize that this is the game versus the movie.
I know, like some of these like larger shots of the entire valleys and things like that, like where you don't really see the aliasing as much and things like that. Or there's even a really awesome first person shot where it looks like they're taming one of those horses. I actually think that looks super.
Also, just
good.
anything with the Na'vi themselves, like doing stuff when it's sort of a brief cut. Like, if you show the human characters, it's obvious. But if you show the Na'vi, it's less so.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like that's a test I want to do at some point. It's just to compare the two.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe we'll do that.
Yeah, I think when this game comes out, it would be really awesome to compare it to the first Avatar. Did they even release that in 4K Blu-ray? I don't even know. But I'm
sure they did.
Probably, yeah.
Almost certainly.
So. Cameron tends to do those things for some films. But yeah, so super excited for this one. Definitely going to test this out on PC, and I imagine John will be all over that console version.
Yeah, hopefully. When is that coming out again? Did they say?
I think it is at the end of 2023. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's a 7th of December, a very late release date.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like a Callisto Protocol situation.
Oh, let's hope that it is not a Callisto Protocol situation in terms of polish on launch. This has been in development for quite some time. Like, I think they talked about it, like, I don't know. I want to say like 5 years ago for the first time already. Like they mentioned it. Another thing that would be great to compare this to would be the original Avatar game, which is running on CryEngine 1, if you recall that one. Do you remember that game coming out,
Which
John?
one?
There was an Avatar game that came out in like around the time of the original film, and it was for some reason using CryEngine 1.
I didn't realize it was using CryEngine 1.
I think that's what it was
That's
using back then. I think that was also
Okay.
another Ubisoft title, but yeah.
That is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Avatar was obviously not the only thing shown at Ubisoft. Another one, and we've seen this one just recently, is Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, which was revealed last week. I thought it looked great, but today they actually showed more footage of the game, including sort of a teaser artistic trailer rendering of the game, which normally we're not big fans of, but in this case I thought it looked pretty good because we had already seen the game, so I didn't feel shortchanged, right? And then they went on to instantly showcase and explain more details regarding the game, and I think it's pretty clear at this point that it's a fast-paced Metroidvania style platform adventure game. The pace and speed of the action, jumping around, platforming over objects, freezing time, dashing from wall to wall. All of this is stuff that reminds me of games like, the Ori titles, Celeste, stuff like that. But obviously with this more physical, human-shaped character, you could say.
Not just like a blob jumping around.
Right,
like Ori.
right. Or even, Celeste, it's small pixel art kind of stuff. This is a different feel, and I'm liking that. But of course, it's also it's a side-scrolling game, but it's not really a throwback to the old Prince of Persia either, right? Because that was a much more methodical, slow-paced game where you're kind of taking every jump square by square, making your way through the dungeon, trying to figure out how to survive. This is definitely a faster-paced game. In some ways, it makes me think of the 2014 reboot of Strider, which I also thought was pretty good.
That is great, actually.
But the main thing, it was revealed for sure that this is created by Ubisoft Montpellier down in France, which is known for Rayman Origins and Legends. So I don't know. What did you think?
I thought this looked really good. I mean, the one thing I read after the fact that they mentioned it might have been in an interview, might have just been a press release, that the target platform here, which would help explain the visuals, was actually Switch. The main target platform is Switch, and every other version is kind of like based off of the core designs from that. And that explains kind of like it doesn't line up a lot with like a lot of engine tech we've seen. It's not the Rayman like 2D tweened animation stuff. It's like 3D baked lighting, kind of like PS3, but even you could almost imagine this running on, not in terms of graphical quality, but in terms of just like the quality of the shaders and all these things. You could almost got like that Xbox PS2 level of like design goals there for that kind of thing. And one thing that actually surprised me in the trailer is that they didn't actually show off any anti-aliasing at all, which is pretty rare. It makes me think that actually we're just looking at like a Switch port. Switch games don't tend to have anti-aliasing and things like that. It's like maybe
I suspect it's not the case, Alex.
Yeah.
Do you really think this is going to run at a smooth 60 FPS on Switch?
Well,
it's entirely possible that what we're seeing is they've just opted for a style that's like very sharp pixel based, right? Rather than using like modern TAA, which I think looks good, but it does produce a much softer image in general. They may have just felt that didn't match what they visioned for the art here.
Yeah, well, what I meant there is that like maybe the game doesn't even have an AA option in it. Not that we're seeing the Switch version here.
Okay. Gotcha.
Oh yeah, no, but also I think the Switch version would probably not look as good as this trailer does, and specifically in the texture area.
Yeah,
Switch
time.
Always makes those kind of compromises.
Yeah, we saw some screenshots of the new Sonic game running on a Switch, I guess, and boy oh boy.
Was that a thing?
That is a thing. I can't wait to cover that. That's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
But yes.
I think Ubisoft on the Switch, they've tended to hit their performance targets well enough in the past, but they have released a lot of 30 FPS titles on the Switch, actually.
Yeah. But yeah, there's probably not much more to say about Prince of Persia because, we've talked about this before on a prior DF Direct. It's just, I'm very excited for it. I like these types of games, and I'm happy that this studio is making another sort of 2D action game, and I'm very curious to see how it turns out, because Metroidvanias, they're a dime a dozen these days. They're hard to do right, And a lot of it comes down to this combination of, is the moveset satisfying and is the level design interesting? And if those answers are both yes, it could be phenomenal. But if the level design is tedious, the map layout isn't entertaining to run through overall, it could really kind of knock it down. And I don't think these guys have necessarily made a game quite like this before. So
yeah, we'll see what
we'll see. I'm wishing them the best, though, and I hope it turns out. And I also hope we see that Sands of Time remake again, which got completely rebooted itself.
Yeah.
Some other games to mention. Not much to say about this. Skull and Bones was revealed again, and sort of they did a sea shanty music video for it, which was something. The thing about Skull and Bones is that I've posted this online, but first of all, I played Skull and Bones like in 2018, so watching Skull and Bones now, it almost feels like I'm looking at a sequel to a game that never released. And then somebody else commented about like how many games X developer did, and they mentioned Insomniac, and I actually looked it up, and this game started development in 2013, and Insomniac has produced and developed 19 games since then.
Oh my gosh.
When you think about development hell, I feel like Skull and Bones is going to be the new champion, because it's been 10 years. It's been 10 years. And this project, to me, always felt like it started from, hey, let's do the Assassin's Creed 4 boat sequences as a standalone game. And now it's turned into God knows what.
I don't even know anymore what it is. I mean, it is that, but I think it's also, I mean, we have to talk just briefly about the trailer because it is a music video for a sea shanty, and that is a very funny thing. I mean, it's very theme appropriate. I did actually like it. The song was a bit whatever, but very funny in that aspect. But the gameplay itself that they're showing there, it does seem to imply you're going along with your friends and that there's looting as a part of it. Something. It's not just like the multiplayer ship aspect thing, but they mentioned like getting new things in the song itself, like finding new booty.
So is this Sea of Thieves?
Yeah,
which was the original comparison point, because when this game was first revealed to the public, Sea of Thieves was not out yet either.
Yeah, so I'm curious about that. I mean, one thing that I'm laughing about is I distinctly remember last year when the original release date was occurring, I got like an email about like system specs and even the fact that the game was going to be using like things like RTX GI on PC and DLSS apparently, and I was like getting geared up to like even reserve slot like a slot time in my schedule to cover it, and then here we are again for how many years in a row talking about this game again. I mean, whatever, we'll maybe cover it in some capacity when it comes out. It's just hard to once again find in the schedule, like when John was talking about in the last video the other day, like, or it was Oliver, the September-October timeframe, or even after that is just going to be, it's just going to be nuts. So we'll see.
So then there was the Crew Motorfest, which, so that's an interesting one because it's basically an open world arcade style driving game, right?
Yeah.
And looking this up here, so Ubisoft Ivory Tower, the studio behind the Crew was Eden Games previously. 3 founders of it were employed by Eden Games, which is the developers of Test Drive Unlimited, which I think is one of the first ever like true large scale open world driving games.
Yeah.
Forza Horizon then went on to take that same concept and make it even better, and that's become the dominant series. The Crew itself that they made never really found that, and it had kind of a different vibe, where it seems like now the Crew Motorfest is basically being created to now more closely match Forza Horizon, the sort of festival vibe with like bright colors and like big events happening and all kinds of stuff like that. But it's hard to, so it looks nice enough visually, but I won't say it looks super impressive necessarily. And the worst thing is that they actually started off this section by showing a CG trailer before showing the game, which kind of compares unfavorably, I think.
I have no idea why anyone does that anymore. And the thing is, like, because in terms of editing style, they're both very similar to one another. Like, They're both like fast cut, kind of hardcore music going on in the background, showing off the variety of locales and vehicles that are in the game. And they do the same thing, just with one of them has worse graphics, and one of them's real though, and the other one's just fake. It does a disservice to the game, and I don't think CGI trailers are great. The one thing I do at least like now is if you go actually over to the Ubisoft YouTube channel, is they do mention when trailers are actually pre-rendered now in the trailer themselves, which is great, which is something in the past, obviously Ubisoft has gotten in so much trouble for their bullshotting, so it's really good to see that. Visually, like, I'm not right at the same page that John is here, where I think it looks good enough for the game that it is, but it's nothing like particularly special in this era of like games that we see, especially racing games.
I wouldn't say it necessarily needs to be if the game itself is well designed and fun. And I enjoy these sort of arcade style racing games, and I wouldn't mind seeing another studio again take a crack at this, especially because it does seem to have a very different theme than the Crew 1 and 2, which I didn't really get along with that much.
Yeah.
So there's I commented on this, but they announced the release date. I think it's like September 10th or around there. And that's dangerously close to Starfield. And although these are not the same genres by any stretch of the imagination, it feels like it's not the wisest move to release something like this so close to a game like Starfield. And it kind of makes me concerned about the viability of this product. And I hope it doesn't essentially fail at the market due to this proximity. So it's a difficult time period for them, I think.
I'm also reluctant to see any of these studios releasing anything around the time Starfield comes out, let alone when the next Forza comes out. I think that's actually a similar time frame as well.
I think it's early October, though.
Is it early October? Okay, so close enough. But there's like a limited mind share and also a limited amount of money people have to give out for games.
I mean, I guess the fair thing to consider is that both Forza and Starfield are Xbox games only, and PC. Whereas this, maybe this will find a PlayStation audience, especially if there's somebody that was like, what, Forza Horizon looks good, but I don't have an Xbox. This might be something to pick up.
Yeah,
I just hope that they have a 60 frames per second mode in here, because all the footage shown here was 30.
Yeah, right.
Which they've kind of had a bad habit of that in the past. I remember seeing The Crew 2 at an E3 one year, and they brought us in to capture the game, and it was on a PC, but they ran it at 1080p, and they capped the frame rate at 30 FPS with a bad frame rate cap, and that was the only way we were allowed to show the game. And I always felt like they were shortchanging themselves a little bit here. Like they could have shown it running best on a PC at least, as long as it was clear that it was PC.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Okay, it looks like it's actually the 14th of September, not the 10th.
Still, it's like right there. So,
but yeah, visually looks okay enough. I would say there's some issues with some of the reflections and spots, and it's very clearly not doing anything too crazy. And it's also it's cross-gen, so it's coming to Xbox One.
Oh my gosh, let's look at that Xbox One version. It's
of course, Forza Horizon 5, gorgeous game, also on Xbox One, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can't judge that too harshly. Moving on, and obviously the big one's coming up, but real quick, I do want to mention that they showed Assassin's Creed Mirage in more detail, which I really like the look of, because this seems to be making sort of a return to the classic original style of Assassin's Creed.
Mm-hmm.
I believe they even include a color grading option for those that want to replicate that bluish tint of the originals, which is kind of fun. I will say, visually, this one struck me in two different ways. On one hand, I thought the GI that they have going on looks awesome when running through the city. That bright orange sun reflecting off the buildings, bouncing around. That looks great. But at the same time, the character models all looked kind of not good.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, when you look at this, it looks good enough, but it doesn't feel like we've come very far from Assassin's Creed Unity.
Still. This does not look a stone's throw away. This literally looks like Assassin's Creed Unity in some ways. I mean, it could possibly even be construed as being even worse because there's no crowds and stuff like that.
Yeah, it looks I feel like the character models look potentially worse, and it's lacking the really fancy bokeh depth of field effects that
looked so good
that they used in well, we'll have to see, but they're not using a shallow depth of field in this trailer. But still, The vistas look great, and the LOD distance is pushed way out compared to Assassin's Creed Unity. So that's nice. And I think this is also cross-gen, right?
It should be. The one thing, there's a couple other things I want to point out on the trailer, other than the fact that I also did, like John, did not think the character models look too hot here. It's just, I don't know what it is.
It's cross-gen.
It is good.
Yeah.
It's good. That explains a bit actually there.
Yeah.
It also explains like I get it. Like we've seen this version of Anvil Next, I think is the name of the engine, right? Being iterated on for quite some time, and like the visual feature set in terms of like cloud rendering, in terms of like reflection rendering, and partially also in terms of GI, hasn't really changed too much since what was the Greek one? Odyssey. Or even the one before that.
Origins.
Origins is like the visual beginnings of this current lineage of
And then
Assassin's
I think
Creed
Odyssey
games.
kind of perfected it for that engine, and then Valhalla was worse overall.
Valhalla, man. Yeah, and here this looks better than Valhalla to me.
For sure.
But it just looks like the exact same as Assassin's Creed. Just like a lot of stuff just visually is so darn similar. And it's like another one of these games in this aspect. I almost really wish they did cancel the previous generation version of this game, and they said like, hey, let's make this a little bit more special. Let's change something up visually here, because it is a little tired visually in some aspects. But I do think the city's better, the setting's way better. I find like ancient Mesopotamia.
And it seems like they're still going to be
cooler.
delivering it at 60 frames per second,
which is great.
Which is nice.
Yeah.
I will take that. I like the sort of assassination and mission stuff they showed, and I was thinking like I wonder if these developers have paid attention to like the Hitman stuff that IO's been doing, because I feel like Hitman, there's a lot to its framework that seems very suitable for Assassin's Creed, and Hitman is not an open world game, so applying aspects of that I think could be really interesting. And maybe we'll see it. I don't know. They infiltrate this palace, which looks pretty cool. I wouldn't expect them to have all of the weird gadgets
ways to kill
and different ways to kill, right? Like that's a very Hitman thing, but still the infiltration part could be more Hitman-esque.
The one thing that also, this is not to just like completely rail on the game the entire time, but I do have a negative feeling always when I see like chest high grass in a game now that is just used for
like chest high walls, but grass.
Chest high wall, yeah, it's like chest high walls, but chest high grass, and because it's like, I get why they need it. They need a safe zone for the character where no matter what you can't be seen, but it does take away from the other aspects of stealth. Like I do kind of like Splinter Cell 1 and MGS where like you're wall leaning a lot. And I think that is something that would be really paying off here. Like we're sneaking around objects and climbing on them is the way the scenes are set up, and less so you have the stealth crutch of giving the player characters just grass that they can freely roam around in and do anything from. Like I did laugh a tiny little bit when the character jumped into the courtyard and like jumped into a massive hay stack, and like the only people who notice are like right next door. But usually if you see a person jumping 20 meters or 10 meters down, you're like, what the heck was that?
That's kind of a series throwback, right?
I know it is. I mean, it's throwbacky, but I do wish there was like a purely stealth game and didn't, like the open world aspects are take it or leave it for me, but like the stealth stuff, that's where I would play it.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
We'll see how it goes. I love the music though. That was my favorite part of the trailer. Music's great. Assassin's Creed games ever since the second game have had incredible music, and I thought the music was great.
But what stealth franchise they didn't show? Splinter Cell. We've been hearing about that for a while. It was a no-show. I was actually kind of hoping for that, but at least they didn't let us down at the end of the show, because they showed off Star Wars Outlaws.
Yeah.
So they showed a trailer during the Microsoft show, which didn't reveal much, but then they suggested, we're going to be showing gameplay the next day. And boy, oh boy, did they deliver. They showed off some gameplay, all right. And
oh my goodness, yeah.
Although this is a case where what they showed looks so good that you're almost like, wait, is this another The Division or Watch Dogs situation in the making? Like, I hope not, but because it does all look very attainable.
Oh yeah, I'd say it does look like Gamerside had a like super ridiculously raw bitrate version of the trailer that was way better than what you can get on YouTube.
Yes,
And
big time.
as soon as you watch that, you can start seeing like it's super real time. There's a lot of aspects in it.
Yeah, it's
real
not
time.
just real time; it's super real time.
It's super real time. For one, it does things that a game needs to do. Like it limits the cutscenes to 30 FPS, which is hopefully a toggle on the PC version. And then in gameplay, it's unlocked up to 60, but it doesn't always hit 60. There's moments where it's dropping frames in the trailer. There's things like if you do look in the distance, you can see LOD behavior. That's pretty reasonable. You look at I did some resolution counting, and it's like 1440p internal, and much like Avatar, since this is the same engine as Avatar, it seems to be using FSR 2. I don't know what platform this is running on. I can only guess.
Wait, didn't they confirm it was PC?
I mean, yeah, it is PC in the aspect of that they rendered it out as a literal ultra wide trailer, which the consoles do not even support internally.
Right.
It's like actually 3840 by 1600, which is not too far off from your monitor resolution, right, John?
Actually, they could technically do that on the consoles, though, right? They just put black bars on there and render only that screen area.
So, yes, this is true, but the output couldn't be that, right?
Well, no.
Because the output video file is actually 1600.
Right, but maybe they just cropped it, is what I'm saying.
Okay, well, that's true. Maybe they are doing that, but I'd hope not. I'd actually hope that this is a real 16:9 on console, because most people have those kind of sets.
Yeah.
They don't have like a ultra wide set. And you see things like that, 30 FPS cutscenes, dropping frames, it has some issues in some
Low
areas.
frame rate hair.
Low frame rate hair, which was totally weird looking. I have no idea what that was about.
It reveals that it's at least likely, real time stuff, right? Or
Yeah.
at least was captured and then rendered out this way. Still.
Yeah. There were some bugs in there too, like as you scroll down here to the end of my notes, John, if you look at the motion blur at any of this cutscene moments, it renders the motion blur in one frame. It's 30 FPS cutscene in a 68 hertz container, and in the one frame when everything moves, there's motion blur, and then in the second frame after everything stopped moving, instead of being a double frame, the motion blur actually doesn't exist in the second frame, which means there's two separate frames. So the real frame rate is 60 FPS, but the animation's at 30 and the motion blur is at 60. It's totally messed up looking. That's why I think, much like the Avatar trailer, the motion blur is just being rendered incorrectly in here, which is another thing that I hope they manage when they ever do release this game, that they change that up. But there's so much to talk about here in terms of rendering features. Oh my God,
let's start with the introduction sequence. So this seems to be some sort of base infiltration, or more like you're supposed to leave the area, and it shows some stealth-based gameplay, sneaking around, taking out dudes. But this interior area shows off just some amazing lighting and ambient shadowing. Like nothing feels like it's glowing or out of place.
Mm-hmm.
The way everything is lit feels consistent within the environment around you. They have this interesting fisheye thing going on in the camera to give it I guess more of a lens cinematic feel.
Yeah.
But it's really nice looking stuff, especially the way they handle the light pouring from outside into this interior space before you actually go outside. That feels very natural and realistic.
So this is one of those things where I think that realism of the indirect lighting that you described, like the cave entrance to the inside of this hangar where the A-wing is, I think it's just one of the instances that shows off that this is definitely using whatever Massive's implementation of RTGI is. And there was actually a really good showing of it towards the end of the trailer, just to not go in chronological order here, but right when the main character gets inside whatever their ship is and they open the door to the cockpit, if you look at the wall to the right hand side adjacent to the cockpit door opening, you can actually see the bounce lighting filling the area as the door opens, which is something you really only get with RTGI. And that looks spectacular. That's the kind of stuff I love in games, and you can actually see the light animating in motion. Because in games, you can get similar looking backlighting, but as soon as anything moves, it starts looking not right. And here, the consistency is also for moving objects and moving things. So that's what makes it look so great. But going back to that beginning part, I think another thing that looked also really, really good, and they did it really well as on top of this in The Division, was particle effects and smoke are really well lit and rendered in the environment.
The Star Wars style explosions specifically seem to lend themselves to this. We saw it back with Star Wars Battlefront from DICE.
Oh, that's another one.
Where their explosion effects were just fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
and they are definitely here as well.
Yeah, there's a ton of stuff like the way the smoke is being lit ambiently by the environment, and also it seems to be getting GI on it too a bit, which is great. I do actually like in terms of gameplay here, like it's a little bit hard to say what type of game we're looking at because there's implications that it is an open world game.
Yes,
throughout this entire trailer,
I believe it is,
and also it's multi-world game where apparently you go between different like landing zones on planets is what it seems to be. Almost like I don't know what game that reminds me of.
That makes me think of potential. As this is a very story-driven game, I suspect it might be something similar to Mass Effect. Like not exactly that sort of gameplay, but like that structure, right? Where they maybe have a few main planets that you can visit, as well as other side things that you're going to, and then each of the planets, worlds you visit are their own sort of bespoke open world environment. I mean, we don't know how large each area will be, but that seems like what you might expect.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. That's what it sounds like. It's like different, like I don't know how big these hub open world areas are, but
right, so
just about how far the character drove on the speeder bike, I thought they did look pretty large actually.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, we'll see. Like another thing to talk about in terms of that opening segment as they're going through there with the A-Wing, or even further on as they get towards the tavern, they really nailed down like the worn frontier aesthetic of like the materials of everything there, like, and it's also being lit really well due to their RTGI solution most likely.
Plus they have a lot of neat little pieces of the environment, like small stones and flowers sort of blowing in the wind, and these little stone particles or sand particles are even shadowed.
Oh yeah, on the ground
blowing along. It gives it this real sense of like motion and liveliness.
Oh, it's super
plus all
sweet.
the blowing banners, like as she walks into the tavern, you see these sort of like things hung up all around you, blowing in the wind very realistically. Even the little cables running from what looks to be a mounted air conditioning unit are moving along. All of the stuff lends the environment this like sense of realism. So they have a pretty robust sort of like environment physics system going on, or like a wind simulation, I guess, that I really like. It's very convincing.
Yeah, and I think there's also just like a general variety of another thing that just points this could only be current gen thing is like just the variety of like objects in the environment that are scattered everywhere. It's not like the same barrel that you see like 6 times. There's actually a ton of different.
Although you looking again at the footage at the entrance when she walks into the tavern, there's that shadow right off
on the
left
hand side.
That's pretty. Like,
it's so going nuts.
I guess they're not really doing RT shadows here. There's a lot of evidence of
shadow map stuff.
But you know what? That's fine, given everything else that's going on.
Everything else is going on. And then like I think the cutscene when they go inside as well too. One thing that you usually see in like an open world game, and I think like when you covered the second Horizon game, it was like we were starting to see like one of the first times where even in an open world game, the main story cutscenes are actually just like really polished, like stuff you'd see out of a completely linear adventure. I mean, that's part of that's budget, but also text evolved enough since then to make performance capture much easier to clean up for even like a mundane, probably every moment mission cutscene that like we see here.
I suspect it'll have those A and B quality cutscenes though, right? Or you have,
I imagine too.
Maybe even C tier, depending on what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's partially an RPG here. You can choose to bribe and or not bribe the Imperial official. We'll see. But
the whole flow of the trailer, when you think about it, is actually kind of Watch Dogs, like the Watch Dogs reveal, right? Where you're like going to an area, I guess there's a little more action early on, and then you talk with someone, then things go bad, and then you got to escape, and it's like taking the Watch Dogs concept to the next level. Basically.
Yeah, it totally is. I mean, a lot of this, like, it's kind of interesting. It's like it goes from semi Watch Dogs. At the beginning, it actually reminds me a lot of Uncharted, like the sneaking around an area that is like really like well made visually and perhaps design wise too. It's hard to tell. It's just a trailer. And then like it goes outside and it's like an Uncharted chase, but it's through an open world instead of a like, static world, like linear world. But then it goes back into like this watchdogsy kind of thing, like where you're doing some random stuff. I don't know. The end of the trailer, though, I did find intriguing from a gameplay perspective, because the one thing that is quite different and the thing that makes it more Star Wars like at that aspect is that you shoot off into space through the cloud layer. The clouds look gorgeous, by the way. But it's not like a real planetary, like you go from the planet into outer space and there's actually like a real 3D planet filled with tons of stuff. It's more like a really well hidden loading screen.
Yeah,
the screen's like mainly white.
There's some nice volumetric clouds that you can sort of fly through. Looks like on the planet. I assume you can get into the craft and fly around. Maybe not.
I mean, I just want to say no, because
I guess
like
she brings up that map first, I guess.
Yeah. So like that's the thing that told me that like it's maybe kind of like Starfield, where you have landing zones on a planet,
so.
And then there's like a sequence that brings you off the planet. And then you get control as soon as you reach the next area, which is like when the craft turns around in the orbital zone of the planet, you can actually see it's like way further away from the planet than it actually would have been if it had broken
right.
cloud layer.
Yeah.
So, like there's things
clever,
like that.
Though.
But it's super clever. But that's the part that I'm really interested in, because I actually do like space combat games, even ones that are more arcadey. And, like that area afterwards, like the junkyard in space in the orbital plane, was super awesome looking. And then they like flash off to another planet. Super awesome.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
And then there you go.
They've just nailed the Star Wars aesthetic here. And much like Jedi Survivor, and Oliver said it really well, something about these Star Wars games really inspires developers to just like go super like ham with like asset quality and like rendering quality. Like this is like super beyond like most other games we've seen. It's really well done in those aspects.
I agree. And I guess the jury's still out on, one, how long is this game going to take to make? Two, will it actually look this good upon release? Have they learned their lesson not to tease stuff that they can't achieve?
Yep.
Three, what kind of I guess sacrifices will be necessary to pull this off on the consoles?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess four, I mean, come on, 30 FPS has been in the news lately. This is going to be 30 FPS on those consoles. I'm almost certain. Like if it's not, then I will eat my words happily.
Actually. I mean, looking at this, John, like I can't. I mean,
I just don't see how.
Yeah, one thing we should obviously point out is like 30 FPS is we should probably start coming to expect this for a lot of games, especially ones that are going to be using things like RTGI, like this probably is going to be using. But we should always rally for like a 40 FPS mode in games.
Wow, they say coming 2024. You think that'll actually happen?
I don't know.
I mean, I don't want to. Suggest that they're wrong about their release date, but if they actually pull it off and it looks anywhere near this, I'll be very, very, very impressed.
Yeah, that'd be great, because it'd be one of those times where we're actually not waiting a ton of time in between announcement and launch. Which is
because you remember the thing about Watch Dogs when it was announced is that announcement occurred before the consoles had even been revealed. It's just like, this is a next gen thing that we're showing. The only comparable game we have to that is, I guess, Senua's Sacrifice Hellblade 2. Well, when the Series X was revealed.
Yeah, and it was shown before. It was shown before it was using the engine was actually going to run on in the
exactly,
end there, UE5,
exactly.
which is funny.
So
my God.
That's all the Ubisoft stuff for now. I think it looks great. I guess we should also mention the fact that Capcom had a show.
Yeah,
but they didn't show a lot that was new or interesting, except for one thing. There was a trailer for Pragmata. Or Pragmata. I don't know how they
I don't know. I
it.
always say Pragmata because it sounds cool. It's like Pragmata.
So this is the game that, in my eyes, was going to become the new Deep Down. Deep Down being a game that was revealed for PS4. It was shown playable at a TGS at some point after that, but then it just disappeared.
Maybe, I think. Nobody's
spoken of it again. It's just gone. So we're like, okay, that game is clearly dead, even though I don't think they have ever officially come out and said, yeah, the game's dead. It just is. I thought that's what Pragmata was going to be. But then not only did they re-reveal it here with some visual improvements, including their hair strand system from RE4, but they very specifically, they showed the little girl making a drawing that crosses
cute.
out 2022 with an arrow to 2023 scratched out, question mark, and then very sorry. So the team knows. They know what people are thinking about this game. And this trailer actually gives me confidence that they've since figured out what the game is, because that reveal trailer showed nothing. This actually shows what looks like gameplay scenarios, right? So it seems to be some sort of like action game where you're protecting this little girl who has crazy powers along the way. I like the aesthetic a lot. I think this looks very, very nice. And it also seemed to be using, assuming this is all real time, it looks like they're using the RT reflections.
Oh yeah,
from RE Engine. So
there's
which is great.
And they're even better. I think they honestly
look better.
I think they're better than the ones you usually see in RE Engine.
They do. I agree. They look really good.
So the funny thing is, the original Pragmata trailer that we saw, I don't even remember when that was. Was that 2019? 2020. That was one of the first times we saw RE Engine's ray tracing features, and they were like in a like not completely developed version at that point in time. Like you could see like the RTGI as well as the reflections here, and here they actually look much better than the other RE Engine games, because usually in RE Engine games like the stuff like they're fine, but they don't look high res enough for like the rest of the environment usually. I agree. And here they actually looked pretty okay. Maybe it's because the resolution they're running this trailer at, it's hard to tell, but they actually look really good. I didn't find any super obvious evidence of the RTGI that the engine also supports, but given that the original trailer showed it off, it'd be a little surprising if it wasn't actually still in there.
I guess we'll have to see what we take from this. The gameplay snippets all seem to run at variable frame rates as well. Yeah, totally. Which is at least potentially them taking snippets from whatever build they have running and just putting in the trailer, right? Yeah, which is cool. So I'm happy to see that this game still exists, and I'm glad Capcom did not give up on it. And actually, between this and a couple others, there's definitely some new IP coming along. Although I can't say I'm super into Exoprimal.
I have no idea what
I don't know what to make of that. That's something else. But yeah, aside from that, I mean, they pretty much just showed more trailers and stuff of things we already know about. They showed off the new version of Ghost Trick. They showed off some more
game. Yeah, the Path of the Goddess one. That the one that they showed off at the Xbox.
More RE4 VR, which, you know what? I bet that's going to be amazing.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So they're really good with that. But I guess that's kind of about it though, Alex.
Yeah.
That's all the new stuff that's been shown since we met last, right?
Oh yeah, it is. I mean, we're still gonna be doing our Starfield talk very, very soon. So you can still expect that. The reason why I really want to talk about this today is because there's some super next gen or current generation rendering going on there in at least two of those Ubisoft massive games, and we definitely needed to talk about that. It's good stuff.
Absolutely. But I guess it's going to do it. Thanks for joining me again, Alex, as we fought our way through this thing. And we'll be back with more discussion, including a piece on Starfield, no doubt, because that itself was basically as long as the Ubi conference almost. Yeah. Just Starfield was. So we'll see you then. Bye for now.